unabated. And then in a major speech that Julius gave over the last couple of days, he had a couple of things to say. This is what he had to say. I'm going to play it, I'm going to comment on it, and then I want you and I to debate it.
Indians were better off than colors. Colors were better off than Africans. We were not oppressed the same. Our oppression was worse than the oppression of the Indians. That's why in the liberation movement, we used to say we are fighting to liberate blacks in general and Africans in particular. We must never apologize about that. Our struggle is to liberate Africans in particular. Apartheid legacy is still there, especially from amongst some of our black brothers. Majority of Indians hate Africans. Majority of Indians are racist. And we must never be scared to say that. They are racist. I'm not saying all Indians. I'm saying majority of them. The same thing applies to some of the colored brothers. They see themselves as more white than being black. It's a reality we have to deal with. The Indians had all types of resources even when they were oppressed. The resources that Africans did not have. To show, I want to give you two examples of why I say majority of Indians are racist. If you check the marriage rate between Indians and Africans, it's extremely low. Africans and Indians do not marry each other because majority of those Indians see us as subhuman. We actually marry each other more with white people than with Indians. An Indian who marries an African gets isolated and discriminated amongst Indian communities.
Okay, so that was the first thing that he said by way of his first evidence, right? So the first evidence is that while Indians are not marrying black Africans, so therefore they must be racist. Even white people marry more black Africans than Indian people do. And then the second bit, which you can't hear in the clip there, is that he said the following, and I quote: "The second point is that the majority of Indians do not vote for African parties. The majority of Indians do not vote for the ANC. They do not vote for the IFP, for the UDM, for the EFF. They vote for the DA because they see themselves as being closer to white than African struggles. If there are Indians who are going to catch feelings over this statement, it is your own baby to feed Malta Bella." Now, I wish it was funny, but it is not funny in a country where tensions between racial groups continue unabated. And I want to say a couple of things about Julius's remarks. Firstly, there are many groups in South Africa that have an incredible internalized hatred when it comes to who they have sex with and who their sexual partners are and their partners that they may be prepared to marry. For every Indian person that marries an Indian person, I can find you countless examples of black Africans who will never be seen dead marrying someone who is Indian. So it cuts both ways. It is part of the South African reality that all of us have sexual politics that are deeply racist because of the history of colonialism and the history of apartheid and the ways in which we have internalized othering one another. We all go through it. You've been through it. I have been through it. I was raised in a homogenous working class colored community in Egini. I was told that black people are the bogeyman. They work for my mom and my dad, exploited, even though my mom and my dad were also poor and working class. Black Africans were exploited. If you weren't sleeping at night, your mom would scare you and say, the Bantu is going to stare at you through the window. Please make sure you draw the curtains before you go to bed. I internalized that logic. It was halfway through university that for the first time I found myself dating, for example, black African men. And even then, because of the racism inherent in me, the first black man that I actually had sex with was unsurprisingly a black American, because there had to be something foreign about the black person before you can humanize your own fellow black South Africans. But the same thing is true of black Africans. We also have that kind of racism. I've heard the most horrific things said about and attitudes displayed towards colored people, white people, Indian people, by black people. And the same goes for white people. The same goes for colored people. I often talk about the racism in my own family, in my own community, and it makes many colored people uncomfortable. So I'm sorry, Julius Malema, but Indian people do not have a monopoly on how the history of racism has affected our choices, who we date, who we play with, who we befriend, who we marry, and who we have sex with. So to isolate Indian people in that example about interracial marriage data is, quite frankly, simply to be grossly selective in understanding how racism has been internalized psychologically and how it plays out in all of our preferences. If you are a black African person listening to my show right now, go into your memory bank, think about the last 10 people you've had sex with, tell me how many of them have not been black African, and you will be in a statistical minority because that kind of internalized race homogenous way of thinking about who you have sex with and who you marry, it is a South African reality. It's not the reality exclusively of South Africans of Indian descent. That's the first point. Now, the second thing that he says about voting patterns is a little bit more interesting. But again, here, I would ask you, what is your source? How do you know who people of Indian descent in this country vote for? Because we do not collect this kind of data, right? The DA prides itself on what it hasn't shared with the public, supposedly robust internal research they do about who their voters are. Now, I've never seen it, so I can't vouch for the quality of it. But the DA themselves have told us that in the last couple of elections, if you just look at how white South Africans vote, the vast majority of white South Africans vote only for the DA. Do we do we infer from that that white people are racist only on account of who they vote for? Are the majority of white people racist? Because some 90% of them, according to the DA, vote for the DA. So if we're going to use voting patterns as a litmus test for commitment to not being racist, what will that say about a black person who says, you know what, I cannot imagine voting for the DA. I cannot imagine voting for a party that has a colored person like Patricia de Lille leading the Independent Democrats. There's no way I'm going to vote for them. I mean, the psychology of voting in this country is so complex, and the quality of social science research into why we vote for who we vote is so poor. I don't know where Julius Malema thinks he gets off to without any empirical sourcing. Just some throw out there that A, it is a robust fact that most Indians vote for the DA, and secondly, even if that fact was true, that he somehow has unique insight as Julius Malema, a nincompoop, into what the operating logic might be for who it is that someone who's Indian is actually voting for. And I think we got to call BS on the EFF. I'm sorry, they've been the media darlings for a long time because they've been a wonderful thorn in the side of the ANC. But even if the EFF brigade on Twitter, who think that they will always have an obvious ally in Eusebius Mckaiser, go crazy, we're going to call out your racism as much as we call out the racism of Kali Kriel. This thing of stoking tension between black Africans and people of Indian descent in the hope that it will somehow be politically politically useful to you now that Zuma is no longer a thing and you've got to find something else to clutch onto. It is grossly unacceptable, it's irresponsible, and I hope you get punished at the polls for this kind of naked racism.